All right, how should we start this?
That's a good start.
We're here for what should be one of many fan mailbags for Shannon Drayer, Mariners reporter here at 710sports.com. So Shannon, thanks for joining us.
I'm glad to be here on my mailbag. But before we get started, Howdy from the morning show, just give us a little tour of this room. I mean, if you haven't tuned in, and we're doing all sorts of fun things on video right now at 710. And what do we? Is this the clubhouse? What do we call it?
Yeah, we're calling this the Sports Lounge. This is the
Sports
Sports
Lounge.
Lounge. So we have tons of different memorabilia, current, past, present, some broken bats that we stole, some cards, some cat bobbleheads.
I Can Has a Cheeseburger from I Can Has a Cheeseburger bobblehead night
There
at
you go.
Safeco Field.
Awesome. Yeah, so we got all sorts of different memorabilia here, and we'll rotate some stuff out through the year, but this is what we do in our videos this year.
And you can't see it here, but we've got green screen over here, whiteboard over here, anything you could want on football. We've got Brock Heward, we've got Jake Heaps, all breaking everything down. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. Obviously, if you're here, you're on 710, but kind of peruse around the site because really some good things going on the video side of things as well.
Yes, so one of the cool things we'll be doing with this mailbag is you can tweet your questions to @Shannon on Twitter or @710ESPN Seattle or a web editor @Brent as well. So
Do not tweet them to Howdy.
Don't tweet them to me.
We
I get
do not
too
trust
cluttered.
him with the questions.
And I have so many fan requests all the time, it just doesn't work. So.
And you might be distracted because here in 710 Bonneville world right now, huge day.
Yes, big day, crock pot competition next door. I have currently, my wife has entered in a monkey bread in the crock pot, so that's gonna win, and so I'm waiting really strongly for that.
All right, now I would have made something, and I'm glad I didn't because if I did, it would have been ruined because it would have been interrupted by Jerry Dipoto, which isn't the first time. Jerry Dipoto doing Jerry Dipoto things right on schedule. Usually during that general managers meetings, we heard rumblings a couple of days ago, and before you knew it, Mike Zunino is away.
So that brings us to our first question from @MidvaleFan. Center field has to be addressed. Will that be D. Gordon or a free agent signing? And if it is a free agent signing, do you move D. Gordon to shortstop and trade Gene Segura, or do you trade Flash?
Okay, part of that question has been handled so far, but let's talk about this deal a little bit. I know in the morning show, I mean, you are the Zunino guy, but you're also the break it down guy. And so when you look at this deal, I know that it's hard for me. I think it's well known that Mike Zunino is one of the all-time, regarded by the media as one of the all-time greats. You've been around him, you've interviewed him. The consistency that he showed in not just dealing with the media and making our jobs easier, but I think there's an appreciation that we were able to watch him grow up, watch him take on so much, watch him through his struggles, never put it on anybody else, and remain as approachable. If you have to spend 12 hours a day for 7-8 months out of the season, this is exactly who you would want there. The teammates saw that, we saw that, so that's a tough move. And that said, he was one of your guys too.
He was not only one of my guys, he was my guy. He was my favorite Mariner on this team, and it's going to be really hard to watch him rake in Tampa Bay in a little bandbox where he's from and just hitting the ball out of the yard. He's going to hit 35 home runs next year, so that's going to be tough. Would he hit 35 home runs with the Mariners next year? That's probably unlikely, but I think that it's going to be best case scenario, I think, in this deal. It works out really well for both sides. Somewhat similar to the first year of the Mitch Haniger trade, where we looked at both sides and said, well, Arizona, maybe those players aren't performing great, but that team is having a lot of success in the first year of that trade. And for the Mariners, those two players they got in Gene Segura and Mitch Haniger performed excellently right off the bat. And you felt, wow, you gave up players and got better players back. Didn't necessarily result to as many wins as maybe they would hope. But I think moving forward, they're happy with that deal. So I think that's the hope in this trade for me.
The first deal that was going to come down, I was really excited to see right up until I saw it was Mike Zunino, but you have to move on and you have to handle this professionally. But what I was going to look for was, I thought that first move would really show the direction that Jerry Dipoto is going in. And this was a really odd end-of-the-year press conference for Dipoto in that the two previous years, and even when he came into the organization, he had just a clear-cut plan. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. We didn't get that at that end of the year press conference, and that's because this team is very much in between. You read about it, you hear Jeff Passan talk about it, you hear about people around baseball talk about it. Mariners are well aware of that too. So how do you go about fixing it? There's some kind of a hubbub about they're tearing it all down. which came out on Tuesday. And I think that was no more than everybody in one place, all the top national writers, all the top GMs, a lot of scouts in one place. And essentially they were hearing things that we heard in that press conference. And I think they kind of took it as, well, if they're willing to deal Zunino, if they're willing to deal Paxton, which they are, they're tearing it down. But that doesn't necessarily mean that. As long as they keep the three that they call the young core, or at least two of the three, I think they're in more of a step-back mode. But you had to see that first move to see if that's in truth. If they were in a true teardown right now, I would have thought that move would have been to trade an established player for a prospect or a couple of prospects. They traded Zunino and Heredia for not only a Major League ready player, but a player who had a breakout season last year in the major leagues, and a younger player in Fraley, which I'm very interested to see, and we haven't had the opportunity to talk to Jerry Dipoto very much, but he brought up the Haniger and Segura trade. Let's not forget, that was the Segura trade. That wasn't the Haniger and Segura trade. That wasn't the Segura and Haniger trade. That was the Segura trade at the time. And Jerry was telling us, no, we really had our eyes on this Mitch Haniger kid. So I'm kind of interested to hear where Fraley fits into this. If there's anything similar, I'm not saying he's the next Mitch Haniger, but was this a guy that they were insisting on having? And so if you look at it that way, you got the piece for the now, you got the piece for the future, you've created a giant hole behind the plate, but you've addressed a current need, and you've also kind of beefed up a depth need as well. So to me, that's that step back. What does it mean for Segura? What does it mean for Cano? What does it mean for future moves? What do you think?
I think that what you said is exactly where I feel. I think they intended to come into this offseason and say, unless somebody blows our doors off and gives us guys with 6 years of club control who are about to be in the major leagues, like it's not like a Chris Sale trade type thing for me when you talk about giving up somebody like Mitch Haniger or you talk about giving up Edwin Diaz. You're not looking to get one of the top 5 prospects in baseball who's in single A or double A. If you're going to trade those guys, you're going to get high-level prospects that you expect to see in the majors right now, and their clock starts. Because like you're talking about, they don't want to go on a 3-year nosedive. They want to be ready in 2 years to compete for the playoffs. And so if that's the case, you need your stars to start playing like stars then. And so you can't move on from a guy like Mitch Haniger unless that's the type of player you're getting. Now, I don't know enough about the prospects in baseball to know who those guys would be, but if they're out there, I think that those guys would, Mitch Haniger and Edwin Diaz, would still be available. Marco Gonzalez especially, if somebody loves him more than you love him, and you can get 3 guys who are in AAA who you expect to be in the majors this year, I think you can do that. So while I do think they don't want to rip it down and tear it down to the studs, I also think that there is a possibility to do what they intend to do while still moving on from those guys. It'd be tough, though.
I think he's put himself in a good, and he being Jerry Dipoto, in a good spot if he is taking the step back. And that's the question I asked at the media, not lunch, that's in the fall, but at the end of the year press conference, because he, in that press conference, said it would make no sense for him to trade the new big 3, the young 3. That we've been talking about. He would listen, but why would he trade them? So I asked, well, what about a step back? Meaning, what if you were to make a move that perhaps takes you out of contention this year, maybe even the next year? Is that something that you would consider? And I think the door is now open to do that. Doesn't mean that they can't contend for a wild card spot, but more has to fall into place. And along those lines, with the needs that they have remaining, doesn't mean that they need to immediately fill them. And I'm looking at left field right now because the one thing that Malik Smith does not bring is power. And they want more power in that outfield. That's one of the reasons why you didn't see Ben Gamble out there as much as maybe you wanted to. But is that a move that they have to make now, or is that a move that they can make next year?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Yeah.
As far as Cano and Segura and Dee Gordon, well, Dee Gordon obviously is not in center field right now. They're not going to run Dee Gordon and Malik Smith and their 5 home runs between them out to the outfield next year. I can't see anything. I don't see Dee Gordon being a super sub. Dee Gordon's either at second base or not on the team anymore. And if Dee Gordon is at second base, Robbie Cano is going to have to get a few more first base gloves and probably going to be in that DH spot quite a bit too, which will be a huge transition for him. I know he went into the offseason wanting to play second base next year.
Yeah, and that's going to be a tough thing to overcome if they do decide to try and cross that bridge with him. And a clubhouse that from the outside looked like there were some things that maybe were going on in there that they may not have been on the same page the whole time. that'd be a tough thing to do, to go to Robinson Cano and say, this is what you're going to do. So interesting. We may get to some more of that here. Let's move on to our next question. This is from @C from Bothell. Will they get in on the free agent market to get any premium players apart from possibly re-signing Nelson Cruz? Time for the annual reminder to myself that Shannon doesn't get into bets, speculation, or roster guesses, so don't ask her what specific moves she thinks will or should be made this winter.
In the past, that's something I did quite a bit because our GMs in the past were very predictable. Jerry Dipoto is not predictable, and it's a huge, colossal waste of time. I think it's better to look at what they could be looking for in those spots. And the reason why it's a little bit more of a waste of time is because he most likely is going to trade for those players. It's not as simple as, here's the free agent list, who fits. And I think that there is a possibility you could see a little bit more. I mean, they have freed up a little bit of money with some of the moves that we've seen of late. Zunino being gone, that's about 4.2 is what the arbitration estimate was for him last year. They've let a lot of arbitration players go already. They only currently have 3 arbitration eligible players on the roster. They only have 9 signed players on the team, but they still are way up there in payroll because those 9 signed players, a lot of them are getting paid a lot of money, as we are all
currently
aware.
Sitting 5th on the projected highest payrolls at this point in time.
So I think I've got them around 145 if you throw in the leak money and you fill out the roster with major league minimum players. So that's not a lot of wiggle room right there. The interesting question to me was, could they perhaps go to the free agent market for a catcher? Because there are a lot of interesting catcher names on the list. And then Mike Salk on your morning show this morning said something that I think is probably more likely. In losing Zunino, they've opened up a huge hole at catcher, not just this year, but going forward. They don't have the guy right now. And so I'm wondering if you do see another big trade for a James Paxton, or say they do trade Edwin Diaz, as a lot of people would like to see. I'm wondering if that next catcher has got to be a part of that.
That's interesting. If they were going to target a position on the field or a position group on the field in free agency, what one do you think they'd be most active in?
I would think catcher and relief pitching. Both areas which are relatively healthy in the free agent market this year.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I think it's really tough to define, since I don't exactly know what course they want to take. Do they want to take a step back, as in, we want to be like a 500-ish team, or do they want to take a step back like, we don't really care what happens next year, but we don't want to be an embarrassment? If that's the case, I would say that I would expect them to really sign virtually no one, and the guys they bring in to be around veteran minimum numbers, pretty much across the board. But if they do decide that they want to spend around the same amount of money, maybe $20 million less, which, by the way, would still keep them in the top half of the league in payroll, I could see them spending a little bit on starting pitching to round it out in the last 2 spots of the rotation, and finding a way to move on from D. Gordon and sort of shift some of the money that they do have locked in. If they were able to move on from Gene Segura and D. Gordon and free up close to $30 million in cap space, you save half of it, you spend the other half of it on starting pitching and perhaps middle infield, and hope that you can develop an Ian Miller or some of the other prospects that you may be able to trade for or draft in the near future to get them ready in 2 years. I don't see them identifying a lot of players in free agency that you'll still see on this roster in 2021. I think if they're going to sign guys, it's going to be short-term flyers, guys who are coming back from injury, guys that don't have a great track record of success, but maybe have one peripheral stat that they like and hope they can exploit a little bit. But I don't see them doing a lot in free agency.
A true indicator of if this is truly a step back where they are comfortable being what they are for a year or two will be what they do with that money if they do let these veterans go, because it's not just what you're bringing back, it's what's coming off the payroll. So interested to see that.
Yes. Let's move on. Comment on 710sports.com
You need to
from
do better with that. You need
EG.
big, just,
You want to go big?
Yeah,
even
go
when
big
the questions we like, we'll go big?
Yes.
Okay. Are there teams that may look to acquire veterans such as Seager and Cano, and would they be open to acquire them if the M's help pay the remainder of their contracts?
Well, if the M's are throwing in a lot of dollars, there would be. Seager, I mean, obviously is coming off the worst year of his career. That would be the selling low at a very high price tag.
One of the 2 or 3 highest paid third basemen in baseball.
I don't see him being moved. I suppose you could package him with somebody, that's just a possibility, but again, why would you do that if you want to bring back prospects? And at some point, what you have to look at is Do you have more value having this player and not paying out the dollars? And where they're at right now, that might be the answer, or where they could be right now. Or if you pay out those dollars and then don't have those dollars available right away, and not have that player, where are you? And I think you look at Cano and you know that he can still produce. You look at Seager, you hope he can still produce. I'll go ahead and say that injury was significant. I know it was just a toe. There were other things that were with it, but his balance was completely off. His back foot, if you don't have your back foot when you are hitting, everything is thrown off right there. And I'm putting a lot on that he wasn't healthy last year. That said, and I think a lot of work is going to go into that in this off season, they want him to take a different approach to how he approaches hitting. He is, you've heard it before, the tinkerer. Nobody tinkers with their swing more than Kyle Seager. That's got to stop. He's got to define what he is, what he can be, and be realistic about that and go in that direction. And I think what we ultimately will see is what he was when he first came up. I think you may have heard or not, but when he moved from second base to third base, put on some pounds, tried to gain some strength. He figured if I'm at third base, I'm not a little second baseman anymore, I've got to start hitting home runs. And that changed his swing, that changed his approach.
Can I be an irritant and ask a follow-up question?
That's why you're here.
Did they ever ask him to do anything similar last year? And I ask that because the problems that we saw from him, having more of a fly ball swing, striking out more, not making as much hard contact, those aren't necessarily new problems. They were maybe exacerbated a little bit last year, but they're things we'd saw in the year before and even the year previous to that.
I think there's a lot, you've got to remember that a hitter at this level is who he is going to be. And you can ask, it's not necessarily going to happen. It's the player's career. It's up to him what he does with it. And a lot of times they don't want to make changes because they don't think they're going to work, and then where are they? So I know work was put in, but I think ultimately Kyle is somebody that he believes he is his best swing doctor. He has outside help with it. Mariners try and help him with it. You throw in what's happened with the shift, and I think that also threw everything off. There were so many variables. That's why I think you've just got to pull everything back with him and almost start over. Who are you? And go from there.
That is a great answer.
Oh.
It would have worked out great. See, this is why I didn't throw it in the first place. I threw it really hard, but the wind trajectory caught it and threw it right down on the table. All right, we got three more shots to do this correctly. This is from @CL Ask Howdy to confess that his attempt to fix Zunino was a dismal failure.
Oh, boy. That's not nice. But what happened?
A dismal failure?
Maybe just a failure.
I mean, come on. I fixed the guy. He was great. Then he got injured. And then I'm going to guess that a bunch of other people tried to go in and mess with what I did. And then they screwed him up again. And so here we are. So he's going to go to Tampa Bay. Hopefully he can find somebody like me, or maybe he wants to bring me down. I'm open to that. I'm not saying I will do it. I'm not saying I won't. I'm saying I'm open to it. I'm keeping my options on the table. But I think that he has the ability to get back to where he was, and I think that if he was able to sort of just rework and get back into the clinic where we were to get things straightened out, I think he could be who he was and better. So, no, I will not admit that it was a dismal failure. CL Shelfler.
Much better.
Unbelievable.
Next.
This is a comment on 710sports.com. You can read all of Shannon Drayer's work in the Mariners section and on the front page of 710sports.com. This is from Go_Mariners, or Go_M's. There is talk of trading everybody other than Diaz, Marco, and Haniger. I understand a guy like Haniger is someone you can build around and is an everyday player. Diaz is electric and was such a huge asset for us last year. And Marco had great moments and is controllable for years. But here's my question. Why hold on to Diaz? If we trade him now, we can get an absolute haul and speed up the rebuild significantly. If we trade both Sugar and Paxton, the rebuild might be complete by the end of the offseason. Do you agree with this?
Yes, it's a possibility. Is it guaranteed? No.
The guarantees in sports? No.
No. I think that there is a safer route in not doing that. Do I think they are going to trade Edwin Diaz? I'm going to go with the Ryan Divish 50-50.
Well, really?
I don't think it's completely off the table. I don't know that the value, and I think it would have to be, I don't think the value is what the Commodore thinks it is. I don't think you would get all the pieces you would need to get there because of Edwin Diaz. We know that there are a lot of relievers that are on the market right now, a lot of closers, good ones. And for all the reasons he says to trade him, other teams know that too. Relievers are volatile. Now, what I will say is I think that the team that a player is coming from, a team that has raised that player, that has been with that player for the last, 5 years in Diaz's case, knows that player the best. And if the Mariners feel that he's going to remain healthy, he can be a piece 2 years from now when they're going for it. He's still here. Even if he has an injury, say this season, 2 years from now, still going to be there.
Right.
So I think there's value in that as well. So I don't think it's just as clear cut as we'll get these players for it and move on. What are you giving away, and does he fit into? I think it's more with Marco and with Haniger being here 3-4 years from now. But as volatile as relievers are, closers are more consistent. Is he the next Mariano Rivera? It's not impossible that he is. I'm not saying he is, but I don't see a huge fall off. And if you get 85% of Edwin Diaz next year and the year after that from what we saw this year, well, that's helping you quite a bit. So yeah, the value is the highest it's going to be to date right now because the season just ended. I think you have to weigh what that value is to you, not just next year, but going forward.
The dice rule to me in keeping Edwin Diaz around is that if you expect him to be relatively what he is, and even if he was 90, 85% of what he was, that's still one of the top 5 or 6 closers in baseball. 85% of him last year would be that. So if that's the case and you got a 24-year-old kid that's that already, you're essentially earmarking this kid and saying, we believe he is Mariano Rivera, Trevor Hoffman. We believe that we're going to bank on him being that. If he is less than that, if he's a step back from that, how valuable is he really to you in that sense? If he's a guy who converts 80% of his saves and has a 3-ish ERA, kind of like most of the closers in baseball, that value is now sort of diminished and sort of fallen out of the bottom for you. So you can get that guy at $2 or $3 million, which is what he'll end up making once he gets to arbitration the first time. So that's where I think there's a little bit of risk in hanging on, even if he's healthy.
Right, there is risk, and it might not be the smartest thing to hold on to him. I'm just giving the argument of why you wouldn't.
Yes.
And there is one. The other thing I'm interested to see is what does Oakland do with Blake Trinan? You could say all the same things about him.
Yes, absolutely.
In fact, and they are much more in a salary crunch than the Mariners are. I was looking at their arbitration numbers the other day, and I added them all up. They have got a ton of arbitration-eligible players. If you added them all up, and they won't keep them all, they'll probably keep maybe a third of them, but if you add them all up, it's like $12 million less than their opening day payroll this year.
That's just arbitration, guys.
Chris Davis, $18.2 million, according to MLBTradeRumors.com.
Yeah, which is still a bargain.
Oakland doesn't do that easily.
Yeah.
They don't, and this year is the last year the A's will receive revenue sharing.
Right.
So, they're talking about upping their payroll. Well, they have to if they want to keep their arbitration-eligible players. You look at Mike Byers. I think he's coming in at like 9 or 7 to 9. They're not going to keep him. There are they've got a lot of free agents and a lot of arbitration-eligible players. They need pitching. It's going to be interesting to see what they look like. But what do you do with Trinan? Is he going to have the same season next year? And he's older. Is he more likely to break down? I'll be very interested to see if they take the same approach.
Absolutely. And with the focus on bullpen arms, that becomes a much more important question for them to answer, considering that was the major reason why they had so much success, especially in the second half of the season. If that bullpen's not the same as it was, they probably fall back to the projections we had at the start of the season where we all looked at them and said, that's a trash roster with 3 good players on it.
No pitching.
Which I still kind of believe once the season ended.
We'll see.
Interesting.
But they kept Rodney.
My irritant question out of this comment question is if they end up trading James Paxton and keeping Edwin Diaz, how can you justify that? I would say that here's where I come from. I would say the starting pitching is their greatest talent hole on their team. From top to bottom, the most gap of talent that they have is in starting pitching. Everywhere else, now that catcher's vacant, obviously that's a bigger deal, but they have a relatively good hitting situation. They have a pretty good bullpen. Their starting staff lacks talent. You'd be trading your best starting pitcher with no starting pitcher prospects anywhere close by and a payroll that's pretty well maxed. So can you feel real good about your near future, your 2 to 3 year future, knowing that the only guy you really have to count on is Marco Gonzalez, who had a surprising year by most people's metrics and understandings last year.
Well, here's how you can do it. First of all, Edwin Diaz, obviously you would have 3 years from now. James Paxton, you would not have 3 years from now. But the other thing is, do they go the route that we saw the A's go for a good part of the year last year, that Tampa went for a year? I mean, I'm almost of the opinion, and this is going to sound ridiculous, and it is, and I probably shouldn't even say it, but you can probably get through at least the first half of the season with a rotation that's made up of nothing but Wade LeBlanc's and Marco Gonzalez's of last year if you have a lights-out bullpen. We saw teams do it. We see them going in that direction, but you have to have a lights-out bullpen.
The tough part about that lights-out bullpen
is your 6th, 7th, and 7th inning people.
For sure. And then if you do that the first half, if you make that your commitment and they play well, how many of those great major league relievers end up having a full great season? Usually we're getting 60 to 70% of the season they're great, and then their arms are wasted.
Right.
So you're either talking about adding a legitimate starting rotation to one that you don't have. So you're talking about adding 2 or 3 real starters to a rotation, or you're talking about flipping your whole bullpen and trying to add basically 4 new bullpen guys in the second half of the season to supplement that. That's a tough, for me, it's a tough model to feel like it's sustainable, that you can keep doing that year by year.
We saw it last year, and we're seeing it more and more and more. When Tampa started, I'm not saying you go full-on opener with everybody right now, but when they went that, where this is going to last 3 weeks, is what most people said, and it darn near got them to the playoffs, and we saw teams take it into the playoffs too.
I'm going to be really curious if those teams, those same teams that had basically their only success was in the bullpen, if those same teams are good next year and the year after that, that'll really say a lot for what Major League Baseball seems to be trending towards. I'm still skeptical. I'm skeptical that you can keep doing that over and over again. I think you can hit lightning in a bottle, but for a sustainable win model, I'm not really sure.
Clearly, this team needs Wade Miley.
Oh, great. There's some salt in the wound for that one.
Talk about lightning in a bottle. And stomp on it. Okay.
That was a bad idea, by the way, this card tossing thing. I think I'm going to rip the last one.
You okay, going to go ice afterwards?
Yeah, I need to. This one is another comment on 710sports.com from just a bit outside. Do you think that the fact that the new pitching coach, Paul Davis, never played in pro ball or has been a part of a big league staff is an impediment, at least initially, for building relationship and gaining trust of the pitching staff? I've only read positive comments from the players about bullpen coach Brian DeLunas, who has a similar background as a player, so perhaps it's not an issue. But I wonder how open-minded these guys are to info from outside their fraternity.
Depends who the player is.
I would say
every year there are players on a team that just aren't going to listen to whoever is telling them anything.
There's an age gap and an experience gap in that too,
well,
right?
Absolutely. And first of all, younger players, I don't know if new age is the way to put it, but Manny Acta had a phrase for what they were. But younger players are coming up more with the technology, be it any metrics and measurements that they can have for what they do, to the off-season training that they do, and just high technology facilities. And older players haven't done that. So they're almost 2 different languages that you see there. But the biggest thing with pitchers in particular is when you get to the big league level, there's a lot more learning that can go on. If you look at hitters, they're pretty much finished. Hitting coaches, by and large, do not have a lot of impact. They can't at that point. In pitching, a little tweak here, a little tweak there, move this to this side of the rubber, your arm angle is just 1/8 of an inch off, can have a big impact. But there are particularly veteran guys out there who, as I said earlier with Kyle Seager, this is my career. Ultimately, I'm the one who's going out there and putting this on the line. And so they don't trust easily. I'm not saying it's all of them. I'm not saying it's 50% of them. I'm not saying it's 30% of them. But every year there are at least a couple who fall into that territory. A lot of guys wanted nothing to do with the shift. The shift, pitchers hated that. A lot of them still don't like it. To the point where when it was first introduced, it can be a problem. They don't trust it. They never see the ball that is caught behind them because of the shift. They always see the one that gets by. But when it comes to something that is as intensely personal as what they are doing out on the mound, and just basically is their livelihood, they don't automatically take anything from anyone just because they are in a position. So Can it be an impediment? Yeah, you got to earn that trust. You got to build that trust. Is it an automatic that just because this person comes from here or there, they're not going to get it? Probably not. Would a player say, because remarking that, well, Brian DeLunas, have never heard anything. I'm not saying there is anything bad about Brian DeLunas. Player's not going to come out and tell a media member that.
No, never happens.
Or if they do, they're not going to write.
It's going to be in an
off
Uber
the
car.
record.
Yeah, and then somebody's
an
going to
Uber
record it
car.
on an Uber car, and then it's going to be a huge national story.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
it never
yeah,
happens.
no, it matters. It matters because ultimately, it's the player's career. So it's up to them to pick and choose, and how much help are they willing to accept. I'll go ahead and say, there was a lot of trust that was put in Mel Stottlemyre Jr., who comes with a big background, great pitching pedigree. You can always go home and ask Dad some questions and get different outlook. And he was good with the analytics too. I thought that he was very good with mixing. He had the TrackMan out a few years ago in the bullpen. It's something that they've used for a long time. But even he had to build up that trust and that rapport. And anytime somebody, a good pitching coach, is going to a pitcher, regardless of who they are, it's not do this. It's, well, how about maybe trying this? And so it's not as easy as we see this, go do this. And that's where the analytics come in. If you can back it up with the numbers, I think that is something that has helped regardless of what your background is. But to the original question, absolutely, it can play a factor into the buy-in and how long that takes.
Do you think there are specific players in the Mariners pitching staff that this kind of a hire might lend towards more success than others? And do you have any idea of who those players might be?
I don't know enough yet. I mean, there's a little bit of a history with Marco Gonzalez since he came from the Cardinals organization. And Marco, I think, was very open to absolutely anything that was put his way, which is great. Wade LeBlanc was the same way too, and you've got two different ones. I think Marco is somebody that will process anything that is asked of him, will kind of get really into it and is interested to see. He's very into the physicalness of pitching. He knows all that. He knows that in and out. And he also had a lot of success at everything that they threw at him, so that made it easy to keep giving him things. A guy like Wade LeBlanc, when he came over to the Mariners, didn't have much to lose. So he was open ears and, hey, I'll try anything. And it worked for him, too. So I think those two in particular are very good.
Is Felix Hernandez in that spot in the last
What
year
do
of his
you
contract?
think? Oh, is he in that spot? Felix is Felix, and nothing is going to change that.
Interesting. Well, that was your final question for the inaugural Shannon Drayer
And Howdy.
Mailbag. Yes, that's right. And I promise if we do this again, I will not try to pronounce the word crockpot.